2004, we made a film. We made the film Celsius 4111, which was a response film to Michael Moore. And we went to the Federal Election Commission and said, we would like to show ads on television for this movie. And the FEC told us that we could not do that. And so they said, we're not a real filmmaker. You can't do this. And we were like, well, we're being treated differently than Michael Moore. And they said, yeah, really tough luck, kid. And so in 2007, we had made several films between 2004, 2007. And we made Hillary the movie, which is famous in my eyes. Hillary the movie was a film because every one of us, all the smart guys, knew that Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee. So we spent a lot of time and effort and money to produce a film on her. We went to the FEC and said, we're now going to run ads for this movie. And they said, if you do that, we will charge you with felonies under McCain-Feingold. You will go to prison for up to 5 years per count for this violation, because it's you're doing it as a willful knowing violation, as opposed to some guy who just did it by accident. And so they told me they were going to come after me and put me in jail for my speech. And I felt like, my lawyers went to them and said, we're doing the same exact thing as Michael Moore. Why does he get treated differently? And they said, well, he has the press exemption. And so we asked for the press exemption and they rejected it. So I sued the Federal Election Commission. Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. I sued them. It's not the other way around. We weren't on defense, we were on offense. And actually, the lawyers at the FEC laughed at me when we filed, because they said, you have no chance against us. And so as the case went through the courts, March 2009, we had oral arguments. In June, we were the last case on the docket to be announced whether we won or lost. They actually ordered a very rare re-argument for September, which is rarely done. And it's been, by the way, the Supreme Court's not in session in September. So it was a special session of the United States Supreme Court in September to rehear our argument on much bigger First Amendment grounds. So we did that in September. Fast forward to January of 2010, the case was decided 5-4 in our favor. Justice Kennedy, a very respected moderate, but who was a real First Amendment warrior, wrote the decision, wrote the majority opinion, and we won. And the Supreme Court justices protected the American people's political speech and the right to speak freely in elections, and that was an important thing. But the Democrats went insane immediately, because they knew what it meant. They knew it was leveling the playing field. So within a week of that decision, everybody on this call should remember, if you don't, but President Obama went to give the State of the Union address in January 2010. January 2010. And he attacked the Supreme Court sitting right in front of him in the well of the House. And that was over the Supreme Court case that they delivered for me, reasserting robust free speech protections. And so the decision made it difficult for the Democrats to control the narrative, and they started their assault. Within weeks and months of that, and it's a direct correlation, the Obama IRS started targeting conservative 501c4 organizations, a scandal that plagued his administration. But that came from his orders during the State of the Union, where he said, we are going to use every administrative tactic at our disposal. So these are important things to know, and not to think we didn't just get to today by accident. So it wasn't just the Obama administration. Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid introduced what they called the Disclose Act. And it was a great poll-tested name. How could you be against the Disclose Act? Oh, we just want to know who's doing what. So luckily it failed by only one vote in the United States Senate. That's how important what we're doing right now today is. Because back then, the Disclose Act, which is what HR 1 is today, but even more robust from a negative standpoint, it only failed by one vote. So in 2014, they tried to pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, which would have gutted the First Amendment. 41 Democrat senators signed on to destroy the First Amendment. Senator Cruz was really one of the lead warriors against that constitutional amendment, and I continue to thank him to this day. But since taking control of the House of Representatives, the Democrats have introduced HR 1 every 2 years and give it a catchy name like the For the People Act, because who could be against that, just like the Disclose Act before that. Last week, it passed on a party line, 220, 210. You read the legislation, it's of great concern. It is really, the Constitution makes it clear, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And, it's Pelosi and Schumer and those guys, they just have zero interest in not controlling the narrative, not controlling what we do and what we say. And I'll get into big tech and other aspects of this in a minute. HR 1 would greatly hinder citizens at the grassroots level from participating in political advocacy campaigns, exactly what the DC swamp wants. At its core, this legislation is an incumbent protection act masquerading under the guise of campaign finance reform. The bill's draconian disclosure requirements and overly burdensome regulatory regime would have a chilling effect on freedom of speech for conservatives, which is the #1 priority for the left. HR 1 would also double down on the disastrous mail-in voting experiment that we just witnessed this past general election. Instead of asking important questions about what happened in the last election and making common sense reforms, Pelosi and the Democrats want to expand universal mail-in voting and ram it down our throats while throwing out the tried and tested voter integrity safeguards that we as conservatives want. In the past, in years past, this left-wing power grab would be dead on arrival in Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's Senate. But in 2021, with Chuck Schumer in charge, who's vowed to change America, with his 50-50 majority, meaning Kamala Harris is the tiebreaker, he knows no bounds. And he's really, a victim of the left himself, because AOC is looking over his shoulder every minute of every day. The left's true intention are now on full display. Unlike in previous years, flashy poll-tested slogans like For the People Act under the moniker of good government no longer will pass the smell test. And the curtain's really being pulled back. And I think the American people during the Senate debate are going to see HR 1 for what it is. It's a naked attempt by the left to destroy our sacred election system so they never lose another election, and to silence every American who they disagree with and who disagrees with their far left agenda. With everything that's going on around us, HR 1 can't be debated in a vacuum. The left is busy shutting down, opposing thought inside and outside government. Big tech, as I said, is actively shutting down conservative speech. Before the election, Twitter and Facebook censored the New York Post's investigation on Hunter Biden and the Biden family corruption in China and the Ukraine. Since the election, big tech has thrown President Trump off their platforms while giving the leaders of China and Iran the opportunity to speak freely, silencing the former leader of the free world who, got 74, 75 million votes in our national election, makes it clear that there isn't anything the left won't do to crush their political opponents. And that's us. It doesn't end there. Parler, Twitter's only real competition, was deplatformed for a long time because it allows robust free speech that the left doesn't agree with. And the left folks should take this very seriously. They want to find ways to censor Fox News, One America News Network, and Newsmax by kicking them off the television boxes, by making it so that the box top companies, those cable networks, will not carry those, because if nobody has it on their TV, it doesn't matter what Fox News does, what AON does. Socialists like AOC are pushing for a government commission, and get this, to rein in media platforms and journalism that the left doesn't agree with. New York Times columnist suggested that the Biden administration should consider creating some sort of big government Orwellian, quote unquote, reality czar, who will be the decider of what constitutes disinformation and what is not. That is a very dangerous, frightening Soviet-style governing that has no place in our constitutional republic. I can tell you that a reality czar is beyond the pale, but that's something that they're talking about inside the Biden administration. It's time for Biden to speak out against censorship and government attempts to drastically restrict freedom of speech. But I doubt we'll see that, and we will soon find that the president's interest in unity is really just unity between him and AOC and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, not for the American people. This is all part of the left's manifesto to mute and reprogram Americans who don't agree with their radical beliefs. The nightmare of H.R. 1 becoming law would become reality if Chuck Schumer makes good on his threat to destroy the Senate filibuster, because that's the only way they can get H.R. 1 through. So we have to stay very vigilant because these heavy-handed tactics that they could use need a counterbalance. And that's where we need to have everybody read H.R. 1, understand what it means. And we need to have our senators stand tall and fight. So let's go to what H.R. 1 would do specifically. It expands regulation and government censorship of campaigns and political activity and speech, including online and policy-related speech. H.R. 1 would impose onerous legal and administrative compliance burdens and costs on candidates, citizens, civic groups, unions, corporations, and nonprofit groups. Many of these provisions violate the First Amendment, protect incumbents, and reduce the accountability of politicians to the public. Its onerous disclosure requirements for nonprofits would subject their members and donors to intimidation and harassment, which is obviously what they want. H.R. 1 reduces the number of Federal Election Commission members from 6 to 5, allowing the political party with 3 commissioners to control the commission and engage in partisan enforcement activity. That's bad both ways. The current FEC is 6 seats, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and unless they have 4, unless you can talk one of the opposing parties' members to your position, you can't pass anything, and that's the way it should be, because that means it's a real thing. If we take it to 5, 3 Democrats will run us over and put every conservative out of business. It doesn't matter whether it's a C4, a 5, 27. It doesn't a super PAC, a hard dollar PAC. It doesn't matter. The FEC will absolutely run roughshod over all of us. H.R. 1 authorizes the Internal Revenue Service to engage in partisan activity. It would permit the IRS to investigate and consider the political and policy positions of nonprofit organizations before granting tax-exempt status, similar to what Barack Obama's IRS did back during his administration. So it enables the IRS to target organizations based on their political beliefs, something that's totally anathema to all of us. H.R. 1, it seizes the authority of the states to regulate voter registration and the voting process by forcing states to implement early voting, automatic voter registration, same-day registration, online voter registration, and no-fault absentee balloting. It makes it easier to commit fraud and promote chaos at the polls through same-day voter registration. HR 1 will hurt voter turnout through 15 days of mandatory early voting by diffusing the intensity of the get out the vote efforts. That raises costs for all campaigns, Democrat and Republicans, but it really it harms us from being able to really turn out our vote on election day, which is what Republicans are incredibly good at, and the Democrats know it, which is why they want to break that. It degrades the accuracy of registration lists by requiring states to automatically register all individuals as opposed to citizens. So all individuals as opposed to citizens from state and federal databases such as the DMV, corrections and welfare offices, the federal agencies like Social Security Administration, the Department of Labor, Bureau of Prisons, Medicare, Medicaid offices. All of these would be required to be registered. So this would be registering large numbers of ineligible voters, including illegal aliens, and cause multiple and duplicate registrations of the same individuals. It's fraught with peril. It also constitutes a recipe for disaster for massive voter registration fraud by hackers and cyber criminals through breaching all of these online operations and opportunities. It requires states to count ballots by voters outside of their assigned precincts, overriding the precinct system used by almost every state, and allows election officials to monitor votes, staff polling places, provide enough ballots, and prevent election fraud. It mandates no fault absentee ballots, which are a tool of choice for vote thieves. It would ban witness signatures or notarization requirements for absentee ballots. It forces states to accept absentee ballots received up to 10 days after the election, which we see how devastating that can be. We can't have people voting after election day because all the candidates are going to have to do, all the Democrats are going to have to do is see what the results are on election night. And with 15-day early voting, they're going to be able to figure that out really early. And then they're going to go out and capture, through harvesting, all of these absentee ballots enough to win elections. It really is it's just unbelievable. This HR 1 bans state voter ID laws by forcing states to allow individuals to vote without an ID and merely signing in a statement saying they claim who they say they are. It requires states to restore the ability of felons to vote the moment they're out of prison, regardless of uncompleted parole, probation, restitution, and Congress cannot override the constitutional amendment with a statute. So we're going to see about that one. It transfers the right to draw congressional districts. HR 1 changes how we draw congressional districts from state legislatures to independent commissions whose members are unaccountable to voters. HR 1 would make it a violation of federal law to engage in partisan redistricting and mandate the inclusion of alien populations, both legal and illegal, in all redistricting. Basically, there's a case at the Supreme Court right now coming out of California, which is Americans for Prosperity versus Becerra. Becerra, who's the Attorney General of California, and actually it started as a Kamala Harris suit. And Citizens United is part of this case, but it is a case that it's a case going to the Supreme Court for the unconstitutional disclosure requirements that California is trying to impose on all Americans. So there's a current case at the Supreme Court that's going to help us, and I hope everybody will pay attention to that. It's AFP versus Becerra. It'll be up for oral argument here real soon. So let me just say a couple of things. One is a couple of days after the election, President Trump called me to the White House. He sent me to Arizona to oversee the Arizona recount. And he recalled me from Arizona, and he asked me to lead for him the entire recount and litigation effort for the campaign, which I took over, I think on Thursday, a couple of days after the election. But I got COVID a week later, actually less than a week later. So I was unable to really lead that effort the way I wanted to do it, to be honest with you. And but you know, I feel so badly for what he has gone through and what has happened to our president. You know, I had dinner with him a couple of weeks ago, and he is steadfast in his belief that the mass mail-in ballots, that really the rules were changed in midstream, and that these massive mail-in ballots is what allowed them to defeat us. You know, and it wasn't some of these other things that we heard about. It was really the mass mail-in ballots. And that's something that we need to make sure doesn't happen again. HR1 codifies that. HR1 makes sure it happens every time. We have to fight this both. We have to fight HR1, number one, and number two is we have to make sure that in our state legislature, I don't think you guys have a problem in Texas, but in other states, there are problems where some of these state legislatures want to and are trying to be forced by Democrats to reinforce their mass mail-in ballot operation. So it's it's something that we have to fight. We have to stay focused on, and I appreciate everybody's time and interest in it. And I'm happy to take questions, and I hope I know the answers. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Well, wow, that was very informative, excellent. And we do have, I see that over in chat that they have been making comments and coming up with questions. And so Dave, I have Karen Marshall, who is a young Republican on the call, and she is our question person. She's the one that reads the question and then allows the guest speaker to answer. And if you don't have the answer, then we can find it out and give it out later. So Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, I'll start with the questions that seem to be addressed to Mr. Bossie. What are Republicans going to sue should HR1 pass, or after 2022, should this pass, can it be overturned with other bills, or does HR1 as passed need to be put up for reconsideration then?
Yeah, so it's going to be very similar to what I did going to the United States Supreme Court. It's a great question. If HR1 passes, it's the equivalent of, it's similar legislation. It's different legislation, but it was called McCain-Feingold, which was the law of the land for many years until I went to the Supreme Court and overturned that. That's what my case overturned, was McCain-Feingold. HR1 would have to be fought all the way to the Supreme Court. And that is not an easy thing because you don't just take HR1 to court. You have to have a case like Citizens United's case was about filmmaking and making a documentary about a political person like Hillary Clinton. And that case, then we used that case to go and defeat these free speech, violations. What's going to happen is it's going to take time for conservatives to find a case, really work to find a case hard, and then have the money, resources, dedication, and strategic. Mine was a very strategic case. I came up with the concept of the case in 2004, and I won in 2010. Okay. So that's a 6 or 6.5 year odyssey for me as an individual. That's how long it would take for us to overturn HR1, and that's if we started on it immediately. So it's really a 7, 8, 10 year process, which in the meantime, America is changed if they win. So we have to stop this now. Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, Mitch McConnell, Mike Lee, Tom Cotton, these guys, they have to stand tall in the Senate and not allow this thing to be, it has to be defeated in the Senate. Otherwise, it changes our country forever.
All right, next question. So then what can we Texans do to prevent HR 1 from passing, assuming our own senators are going to vote the right way? For example, would sending letters and emails to Senator Manchin help?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for that question. That's great. Absolutely. What I would suggest is sending letters to Senator Sinema in Arizona, to Manchin in West Virginia. I would recommend phone calls, email, and letter campaigns to from as many people inside and outside of those states. You know, obviously inside the state is more effective, but contact friends, family, co-workers, anyone you know in those states, because really Joe Manchin may be the decider. Now, here, what it takes is from a Democrat side of things, it takes 60 votes to get through the filibuster. Okay, to get to a vote of 50, where then they could pass it. So they have to get to 60. Well, they only have 50 votes, so really it requires 10 Republicans to agree with them. So you got to think about that. 10 Republicans would have to vote for HR 1. Mitch McConnell has been a warrior for free speech. He has done, in my opinion, I disagree with Senator McConnell on some issues, but I can't tell you how good he is on the First Amendment. He is a warrior on the First Amendment. He knows the importance of the Citizens United case to how he achieved a Senate majority and how he became Senate Majority Leader. He wants to get back there. So he is going to fight tooth and nail, but it's Senator Collins and Murkowski, right? And some of these other senators. I don't know about Romney and some of these others that are Republicans. We have to just hold our 50 senators too. So it's a two-prong approach to answer your question. People on this call should communicate with folks to talk to the Republicans to make sure they don't vote for HR 1, because without 10 Republicans voting with the Democrats, they can't get there. And then secondly, we have to focus on Manchin and Sinema, who are really our only two options.
All right, the next question asked is, isn't HR 1 unconstitutional, taking away states' rights?
Sure, yes, of course. But if they pass it, that means you have to go to court to find it unconstitutional. It just doesn't get, I can go on Fox News and say, oh, it's unconstitutional, but it doesn't mean anything. So we have to take very seriously the fight in the United States Senate, because once it passes, as I outlined in an answer earlier, it's a 7 to 10 year situation to get to the Supreme Court and win. I mean, and that changes America. That's a generation.
Does HR 1 only allow cases against HR 1 be adjudicated in the DC courts? Is there a provision in that?
Yeah, well, I don't know the answer to that. And I'll give you an example. In McCain-Feingold, you had a provision in McCain-Feingold that allowed me to have an expedited review. So my first case was to a DC circuit. It went to the DC Court of Appeals and then straight to the United States Supreme Court. And by the way, that only took me 6 years. Okay, so think about that. So it only took me 6 years, and I had an expedited review. I had an expedited process because it was called for under McCain-Feingold. I don't know if HR 1, if I had to guess, I would think that it doesn't. So you'd have to go through all of the appeals processes before you could get to the Supreme Court, which adds, another couple of years to the process.
I'm going to take the liberty of asking my own question here. As somebody who went up and was a watcher at the Wisconsin recount, and then I went over and tried to help in the runoff of the Senate in Georgia, what happened with the cases, especially in Wisconsin? Wisconsin seemed to leave the media. All the cases disappeared regarding the recount and President Trump's.
Because we were disappointed. Wisconsin was our best legal case, really, but you have to have judges who are willing to hear cases and hear the facts and evidence. Judges, have a hard time, especially taking on a case where they don't see it's going to change anything. Meaning, in Wisconsin, even if President Trump wins the Wisconsin case, it doesn't change the outcome of the election. So you have judges who are saying, why am I going to get into the middle of this mess when if I do it, it opens up this enormous can of worms and it doesn't change. Even if Trump wins, it doesn't change it. It doesn't change anything. Meaning Biden still wins because changing the Wisconsin outcome doesn't matter. We had good law and precedent on our side in Wisconsin, and we couldn't get the Supreme Court to take it, and that goes for every one of our cases. No, in some of them we didn't have as good of a position, but Wisconsin we did. Pennsylvania was pretty weak. We also the campaign made a lot of errors as we went through. You have a speed problem. You have to keep moving so fast and trying to find lawyers and legal teams and trying to find facts and evidence, and it was an overwhelming thing. Back in 2000, we had about 500 votes in one county in Florida, and the entire world descended on the Bush v. Gore recount effort. But it was 500 votes in one or two counties. I forget. It was one or two counties in the state of Florida, and the entire world was able to focus on that one location. Here we had litigation efforts going statewide in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And it was, to be quite candid, it was a tall burden for the legal teams.
All right. To let you off the hot seat, it looks like the next questions are targeted at our state legislators' election, if that's all right. Chairman Cain, is there anything in the election bills filed which will stop elections administrators from automatically mailing ballot by mail applications to people over 65?
There is language to stop them from mailing applications to anybody who did not request them. Does that cover the question? Meaning you don't get one unless you ask for one.
All right, that does. And the next question, is there any legislation filed that will require ID to register to vote?
I believe there is stuff in the Senate on registration, but we are doing a lot of steps to clean up our registration. However, I do want you guys to know, as a free speech attorney, Citizens United is probably the most important First Amendment free political speech case in the history of the Supreme Court. And so it's a really great treat to hear from David Bossie about this. I don't think y'all realize how extremely, very, very important it is. I've used it several times. I've had several incumbent protection laws here in Texas actually struck and held as being unconstitutional thanks to Citizens United. So it's a privilege.
Oh, well, that's very nice. That's good to hear. Thank you very much for saying that. It's, when we were doing it, you never know if you're going to win. You just never know, right? It's a crapshoot, and it is really. I can't even believe it's been 11 years, but nothing was more surreal. You knew it was impactful when literally a week after, and I mentioned this earlier, but a week after, I'm sitting at home watching the State of the Union, and Barack Obama berates the United States Supreme Court sitting right in front of him. It was, really one of the first times that had ever been done in the history of the United States over the Citizens United case. And I knew it was a surreal moment, but it was also a moment that impacted me, and knowing how much we were able to change for the better. And, you know, Newt Gingrich and Mitch McConnell and others, Kevin McCarthy, these guys, you know, with me over the years have said that that's what's given us the majorities in the House and the Senate over the years, is leveling the playing field. And then for guys like you, Briscoe, who are able to use the case in state law to really push back against the left is incredibly gratifying to me. So I appreciate those kind words. Thank you. And I've been a CMP member for a long time. I don't even know how many years, 20, 25 years.
We've been around each other for a few.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got the text message.
Good to see you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
What will mandate reviews of voter rolls to eliminate those who have moved, died, or otherwise no longer should be on rolls?
We have a fix for that right now. What happens is the Secretary of State, for example, might learn of this information they moved through our ERIC software, and because the Secretary of State doesn't have the authority to enter into that roll and clean it or remove that person, because they don't actually possess the roll. We have 254 rolls technically in a way in Texas. They have to then send notice to the local registrar and say, hey, so and so is no longer on this earth, or so and so is moved, or they're not a U.S. citizen or something, and ask them. And what often takes place in your larger counties, which, by the way, you know, 8 counties in Texas make up 75% of our population, right? So I love you rural guys, but please bear with us when we're trying to address the urban county issue. But what happens is Harris County, Dallas County, Bexar County, et cetera, just thumb their nose at the Secretary of State's office request to clean the rolls. And so I've got some language. I believe Representative Buckingham has language. Senator Buckingham has language, and Representative Mays Middleton have language to begin kind of this centralization of the Secretary of State's office, but with some checks and balances, with the locals still working under them. But it's the only way, for one, if HR 1 becomes a reality, we have to do this. If same-day voter registration becomes a reality, which I pray it doesn't, but we must become decentralized so that we have an accurate database of who these people are, and so that we can properly clean the rolls.
All right. And why are voter registration rolls available to the public online? Someone asked. I have worked elections and there were callers searching for voters they seemed to know, but they found out hadn't voted. Yeah,
I saw that question in the chat box. That's an interesting one. To really give you a thorough answer, we would be here much, much longer. There is actually a lot of theory that the voter reg rolls need to be public and published very often so that people know. I don't know what the right idea is. And these are great conservative think tanks who believe so that things aren't going behind the scenes. Either way, they need to be up to date as quickly as possible. But you can get that through most of the website to look up your own registration to find a role. I'm not sure of the answer, but feel free to contact my office if you can explain to me why I'm wrong. I am very open to learning.
All right. And the last question I had here, what can volunteers, such as in a county party, do about their own county's voter rolls? Is there, if anything?
Mm-hmm. Well, sue. I like that answer. Look, if they're violating a provision of the election code, and the code places a duty on that registrar or that election administrator to clean the roll, and they're not doing it, you can file a mandamus action against them under the election code. It gives you that right. You're being harmed. They have a duty to do it. My answer right now is sue them. But look, often Republicans like to, only go towards elections, and as y'all have heard today, we've got to remember there's a third branch that it was not supposed to be a dangerous branch, but it is. The judiciary has become far more powerful than it's supposed to be, but we should use it. They like to sue us. We should sue them and do the right thing.
All right, and I turn it back over to you, ToniAnne.
Thank you. Wow, I'm so glad that you were on here too, Chairman Cain. So let's, our guest speaker, Dave Bossie. Excellent job. Thank you. I mean, I'm getting incredible responses and on text, as you can see also in the chat. And we just can't thank you enough for what you've shared. And yes, we do want it to go viral. Somebody, I don't know who asked, said, can we cut off the intro part? Well, don't worry, I didn't record the intro part. I didn't start recording till Dave started talking. So we will, oh, was that you, Michael? I think you just kind of said, put your thumbs up. So we will get that out. And if you want to share it, we would love for you to do it, because people need to know this information. And it's so crucial. So Dave, thank you so much. We just have a couple other things to do before we sign off. You can stay with us if you'd like, or if you have to go to Disney World or something fun like that. We hope that you have a good time on spring break.
Yeah, well, it's I'm in Orlando. I'm not on spring break. But my kids are here, and we're excited to be here. But I thank you, ToniAnne, for the invitation. Thank you for everyone on the call. This was a great discussion. I hope I was able to help in some way, give you guys some more information than you previously had. And I'm happy to come back anytime to discuss, races, campaigns, or politics of the day for you, ToniAnne, anytime. But I want to just say thank you, and I'm going to sign off. But I appreciate you guys having me, and I'll look for the link, ToniAnne, and I'll push it out to our social media as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. Keep up the great work. We appreciate you very much. Thank you.